Hello, Marli. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Christine?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining me. I've been wanting to talk with you for a while now, so I'm so glad we're having a chance to do this.
Me too.
I'm very honored to have you here today. I was thinking we've known each other for a while, a decade plus, and so
hmm
it's nice to have reconnected.
It's a huge compliment to be included in among your powerhouse women. And yeah, you met me when I was just getting started in UX.
Mhm.
And at the time, and still, I very much look up to you and see how you've done your career. So to be part of this group and your next steps is a really great opportunity.
I first start out these conversations with an unfair question. You have had an impressive career and an expansive career. And the unfair part is I'm asking, can you describe your career in 2 to 3 minutes? Can you share the story of your career?
Well, I can do the boring version in like three strokes, right? I worked at a small agency as a project manager, learned about user experience, shifted into content strategy, started freelancing, got picked up by another agency to start their content strategy
Mhm.
team. And I was there at MadPow for about 5 years and then got this job at Verily. And that sounds very straightforward and very clean and very boring. Um,
Not at all. And there was no mess along the way, I'm
Yeah,
sure,
absolutely
right?
not. No, and I knew I came out of the womb knowing I'm going to be someday, I'm going to be a content designer. I don't know if anybody's calling it that yet or even if it exists, but that I knew. Yeah, that's
Well, tell me, let's take a step back. So you were mentioning you were starting out as project manager at an agency. So before that, what had you been studying and how did you make this leap?
well, that's part of the windy part. And at that agency, there was a small agency above the fold. That's how we met. I went to school for theater. I was convinced I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be on the stage. I had an aunt who was a stage manager. I was interested in that. And once I got to school and started studying theater and acting and working backstage, I found I loved stage management. I spent my first couple of years after college working in theater. I was a stage manager with a number of different theaters. I struggled, as many people do, with making ends meet financially. And so I started looking at what else is there. I worked commercials, I worked in films, I worked wherever I could use those stage management skills with something creative. And I thought, maybe being a producer is the right approach. And so working in films, working in that area, which a producer in film is the organizer. We see the big names of the executive producers who are kind of throwing the money around, but the production work is predominantly cataloging things, categorizing things, understanding how all the nuts and bolts of it work. So stage management flows really nicely into production. And of course, now financially, I was doing a little bit better, but the hours are atrocious. I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning, working until 7, 8, 9 p.m. I was in my early 20s. I was not sleeping. I had very little social life, not a great space to be. And a friend said, people do this in software and they have careers out of it. So I had no idea that there was going to be anything there other than maybe a way to take a breather from the creative work that I loved and have a little bit of stability for a short period of time that would inevitably be incredibly boring. I wouldn't be able to stick it out very long, but I do this project management thing and I would be able to use my stage management skills and then eventually get back into theater and film.
Mhm.
In fact, I think when we met, I may have still been trying to help out on the side with a few theaters and pick up. I was subbing in for stage managers. I was really convinced that was going to be my career.
Mhm.
And I lucked out because I had a friend who was running a small agency where his perspective was, let me find people who I trust or who have interesting skill sets. And we're going to learn this new thing that I've heard about called user experience together. So he said to me, sure, you're not a project manager, but you can learn that. And I'd like you also to know about this UX thing. And I went to the UXE conference, which that was a thing in the early 2000s. And there was one talk that was about content strategy. And it wasn't just about content strategy, it was about voice and tone. It was about creating character who you could then write with the perspective of. And it was about cataloging and organizing all of these creative ideas that if you want this voice to be able to speak for everything from the most boring terms and conditions to the most exciting marketing and for the helpful, insightful product piece in the middle, you needed to know in and out who this character was. You needed to be able to go through and scan the text of the website the way that I mean, what I had been doing for years with theater texts and scanning
Yep.
whose characters are where and who's coming in where and what props do we need for this and doing all of that work, but with a fictional character that we're creating. It just made sense. I'd done some creative writing on the side, and I found that having a way with words is great, but so much of content strategy is, and I still do excel much more on the strategy side. I work with incredibly talented UX writers. I say to them, I can't do what you do, a pure strategist, and it comes directly from all of that theater work.
Thank you for that, Marli. It felt like you were moving away from your creative career, but not at all. It sounds very much like you're taking the expertise and skill sets, but bringing it to this new area. So it does sound like you're still in a creative career.
I wouldn't still be here if it
Yeah.
had been as boring as I thought grown-up jobs were supposed to be. I certainly don't want to knock the incredible project managers that I get to work with. It turned out from the start it was not right for me, probably partially because I was coming into it with the perspective of if I have to do this, I will. But it also made me appreciate all of the work and very elegant work and often very creative work of managing all of the pieces that need to come together into a plan and identifying how all of those creative areas can intersect. Now I'm in-house. I'm about to celebrate 5 years at Verily. I moved to Verily because I've been working more and more on health specific content. And I found that that really scratched an itch for me on being able to feel that I was having a more dedicated impact, something to really help people. There's a saying that's common in theater, why be in theater if you can't change the world? And I never fully moved away from that idea. And living in the United States, we have a very broken healthcare system. There's so much that we can do to fix it. There's so much that we can do to help people move through it in the areas that we can't currently solve or fix. So that really appeals. So I came to Verily, which is a health tech organization. And now the strategies that I'm working on are very different. It's about meeting early on with product owners and UX designers and connecting on what's the newest research that we're seeing, what's the new problem, what's the latest area that we want to improve, and how can we use content as one of the levers that we use to solve that problem. Exploring a different set of best practices and a different style of strategy.
I've been working with women who are trying to figure out what's next. And when I speak with these women, they're typically thinking that every decision along the way is made with deliberate intention to get to where you are. It sounds like you've had, as you said, some twists and turns. I envision that when you were first starting out, you couldn't have ever imagined you'd be working in healthcare.
Yeah, I think the best advice I've ever been given was my father's best friend told me when I was graduating college. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, and I was like, I don't know. And I was having a
Yeah.
bit of an anxiety attack. And he said, let me ask a different question because you don't need to know what you want to do. What do you want to do next? And I moved to France. That was what I did. But I remind myself of that a lot. I think it's entirely too overwhelming to know what you want to do ever. And that's not to say that people shouldn't have goals, right? My brother has had a distinctly different career trajectory than I have in that he sets his sights on something and then figures out the steps to get there. And every time he's done that, he's done it. Now, he's also had 4 or 5 different careers, but every time he said, that's what I want. And this is the certification I need. And this is the school I need to get it to. And then he puts all of his energy towards that. I can appreciate that and understand that, and also recognize that, particularly in the field of UX, it is still new enough that if you think you've got it all mapped out, 3 new opportunities will come up between now and when you've gotten to the second step on there. So you can have a little bit of both.
I'm wondering, as you were starting out in the UX world,
Yeah.
if you could go back and talk to that version of you, what would you tell yourself in terms of where you've arrived to now?
I think I would tell myself to soak up everything I could without worrying so much about if I was learning the right things. Some people have this natural ability to soak up information, to get interested and excited in whatever is presented to them. And I am not one of those people. I need a way to see why something's going to be valuable to me, a lens through which to view it. It wasn't until I left Above the Fold and started freelancing, and I needed a bit more of an online presence, that I started a weekly blog. And in that space, I challenged myself to just write something every week. And so I started at that point to anything that came across that I noticed, any article, any video, I would read it and then put together my thoughts on it. And I learned a lot at Above the Fold because someone would say, this is what you need to get better as a project manager. This is what you need to get better as a person in UX. But if it wasn't specific to that, I wasn't following many of the trends, and I was constantly worried that I wasn't learning the right things. So I feel grateful that I happened upon the concept of just learn about so that you can write about it, learn about it so that you can create a presence for yourself, whatever the reason. And I think if I could go back, I would tell myself, it doesn't matter what the reason is. Find a reason, give yourself a project so that you can take in more, because there's so much to learn.
In terms of starting your blog, this is a theme that's come up in many conversations. It's about just starting and taking action along the way. Did you have any hesitancy when you were first starting out, putting your ideas out there publicly?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
think if I had any type of clear presence when I started, I wouldn't have started. I only felt comfortable putting my thoughts out there because nobody was watching. And that's even more true now, right? If you start a blog tomorrow, if you start any kind of online presence, a YouTube channel, whatever you do, no one's watching you. And there's so much freedom in that. And maybe 6 months after I started, I went back, revisited each post, did a little bit of rewriting, took down one or two that just at that point I was like, no, this was a terrible take on this. I did one fun one. I had written a post about how horrible I thought Twitter was and that was never going to survive. And
Well,
and then well, yeah, but 6 months later, I was using it actively. And so when I went back and I saved that post, but I wrote a new piece that was like, here's what I've learned. So kind of making use of all that. And it was only then that I started putting it on my resume and put it on my LinkedIn. And I did the same thing maybe 5 years later. I went all the way back and made myself, every week I would go through just 2 posts and rewrite them and improve the readability. And at that point, there were more tools available so that I could use things to evaluate the SEO presence and all kinds of things. Sadly, through a series of errors, I lost my entire website about a year and a half ago. And now I've been wondering, because it is hard to start again and then getting back in the habit of writing every week. It is challenging. And now I do have a little more of a presence, and there is a sense that whatever I put out there, it's going to be seen, it's going to be read. I need to maybe remind myself that people don't really care about me that much. I can write whatever.
well,
It's okay.
I was curious your experience. There's been a lot of discussion, and especially in the UX world, where It's a bit messy in the market. There's a lot of people who are blogging more. There's a lot of posts on LinkedIn. I describe the feverish posts on LinkedIn as a broadcasting approach to getting your ideas out there. To what degree, when you think about your career success now, you got to frame a lot of ideas with your blog? It's great to get your ideas out there, but career success oftentimes is really associated with the intimate connections and relationships you form. When you look at your career, it has exploded and you're doing quite well. I'm wondering, to what degree do you contribute that to your thought leadership on your blog versus your relationships you've cultivated, or both?
It's absolutely hand in hand. I am not a born marketer. I wrote quite a bit and then had that at my disposal as tools so that I could be having a
Yep.
conversation like we're having. And if you ask, have you ever worked with da 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 da? And I could say, I wrote a whole piece on that. And I've done that. I definitely,
Hmm.
particularly when I was freelancing. In fact, I think when I got the job at Verily, during one or two of the interviews, we got into, there was a lot of discussion at that time. Verily was figuring out how to handle a content management system. And that's something I have given a lot of thought to and
Hmm.
had written quite a bit about. So as we were talking about in an interview, I said, let me send you my thoughts on this. I wrote an article and then it kind of gave me an opportunity to show off that I had this
Hmm.
public space, that people had shared it, that it was visible in this way that honestly took some of the pressure off me that I didn't have to write something from scratch
Hmm.
and gave it a little more oomph, showing that I had this public space.
Yep. Yep. I did want to get your perspective on the challenges you've experienced as a woman in tech and how you've dealt with them.
I struggle with that a lot. I struggle with how to guide other people. I look at my own experiences and never know where I got lucky and where I was very unlucky, but managed to persevere. And
Yeah.
I hesitate to take too much credit for some of what I've managed to accomplish. That said, I can certainly share what has worked for me personally and some of what I caveat. So, for example, one thing that I've always been aware of, I mean, I'm a very small woman. I'm 4'11". I was probably 7 years old the first time that somebody pointed out to me that I looked like a 4-year-old from my stature. And I think I took it as a challenge. I may have gotten into a fight. By the time I was in high school, when a lot of other people are starting to struggle with how they're perceived by the world, I had already gotten to a place where I couldn't understand why people would tease me about being short because it was like, and I also have brown hair. I also am very lucky that I was raised by a very strong woman. My mother has been protesting for women's rights since her 20s. And anytime that we came across anything or even the hint that I couldn't do something because I was a girl, she would say, you can do whatever you want. Women can do whatever they want. And I firmly believe that. And I love that what she ingrained in me is the sense that if there is something that you can't do as a woman, it's society's fault, not yours. So, with that as my starting space, and now, I'm in my early to mid 20s, I'm starting to freelance, and I've got these often older men hiring me and then interrupting me. And I interrupted right back. And around that time, someone gave me a book that I thought was the most incredible thing I'd ever read. And it told me that I deserved space and that I needed to do just what the men did and I needed to be pushy. And I started telling everyone this was the greatest book. And it took me way too long to learn from other people that just because that was my experience didn't mean, this is where I, again, to saying like I caveat this quite a bit, because the book was lean in. And what eventually became clear to me that as a white passing woman, I can do many of those things that are not seen the same way when a woman of color does that or a person of color. And so I'm very aware that whereas for me, a lot of what I learned was to make space for myself, to not apologize, to change my tone, to lower my voice a little bit, things that felt very, first of all, felt very easy because I'd been in theater and I was used to this idea that I am fluid, I am
Mhm.
whatever, I can change myself. None of it felt like a personal affront. None of it felt like I was being told that I only fit if I changed these deep parts of myself. But that's not true for everyone. So I am wary of that. There have also been challenges where presenting with a group of men while working at an agency. And as we left, the CEO shook each person's hand and then got to me and patted my head. I'm not even as angry about that as I am at the fact that none of my coworkers noticed. So I also found I had to, and this was much harder, get to a point where I was now willing to be vulnerable. And that's not always the right choice, but it allowed me when I was able to find the time to tell them and ask them, hey, this is not affecting my work, but it will affect the work of more junior people who are getting the same treatment. So I need you to keep an eye out and speak up when this happens because I cannot ask my junior coworkers to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering in that sort of scenario early on in your career, did you feel comfortable speaking up? Like you saw what happened in this situation, but could you speak up?
I didn't.
Hmm.
I let it happen. I think I was so in shock. I
Hmm.
watched him walk out of the room. Oh, okay, that was weird. And the other piece that I have struggled with a little bit is again coming from theater and film. The culture is different, is more akin to what we hear of happening in startups. It's bad. Things have gotten better, but there was very direct, awful sexual harassment, um, attempted sexual assault. When I got into tech, the level was so much lower. It was much easier for me to speak up against it because the stakes were relatively lower. Again, that doesn't help other people unless you're someone who just framing it that way helps you, in which case, great. I think the biggest thing that I would hope would help other people is it's very important to acknowledge where we are lucky, where we are privileged. When Melissa Meyer, am I remembering her name correctly?
Marissa, yeah,
Marissa
Marissa Meyer, yeah.
brought her child into work after like 3 weeks of maternity leave and was like, I want all of my people to take full leave. I just don't happen to have to. I
Yeah.
think that was the wrong choice. I think you have to mirror what you want. And so I am very vocal if I see something that I feel is wrong or inappropriate or just not equitable because I want, even if it doesn't bother me, even if it doesn't feel like a big deal, because I want it to become the norm that we bring these things up until we no longer have to because they're not happening.
As you were speaking, Marley, I was thinking back to it just popped up in my
Yeah.
mind, but one of my biggest regrets in my career. And I remember vividly when you were mentioning having a pet and none of your colleagues even acknowledging it. I do remember working at a senior director role, middle management, maybe middle to upper, but not top tier leadership. But I was off at a leadership offsite at a tech company, sitting in the room with all of the leaders in the organization, 30 plus folks. And the CEO was berating a colleague, a female colleague who was around my level, but was berating her in the room. And my big regret was, and I still think about this, I could have spoken up and said, this is unacceptable. I could have walked out the door. I could have done a lot, but I stayed silent. And it's
Yeah.
still something years and years later I think about that I've been pondering, why did I do that? One of the colleagues I worked with when I was saying how this was weighing on me said, did any of the leaders speak up? Did the real upper level C-level leaders know? And a bunch of people with much more power than I had. And I'm wondering to what degree were they also pondering this or not? I don't think so. I don't think so. I know why I didn't speak up at the time, but it still weighs on me. And I think you're right. The more we can speak up and also align with others and say this is not right and this is a challenge, the better. But I recall why I didn't speak up, and it was feeling scared, honestly, and I still regret it.
I talk with my team a lot about reframing. I find it's valuable for a lot of different types of work, particularly with so many people remote. And so often we'll be reframing, oh, this person demanded this thing of me.
Mhm.
Okay, what's another way to see that? This person was in a hurry and
Mhm.
sent me a really quick message because they trusted me and knew that I would respond. So there are things like that, but it also comes up. I have found sometimes I think it can feel uncomfortable to speak up against something if you believe it happened because you're female. If you reframe that and think, is that ever an acceptable way to treat someone, regardless
Absolutely.
of the reason behind it, it can feel more comfortable, and also reframing from for the many people out there who have been in the situations where we didn't say anything, instead of why didn't I say anything? Why, investigate that. And then we can reframe as I had to go through that so that I could get to a point where now
Mhm.
I'm more prepared. I can say this, I can speak out.
Yeah, and what will you do next? And
Mhm.
exactly, you're absolutely right. We both, I'm sure, had opportunities to speak up since those interactions and have. You're absolutely right.
And I still make mistakes. I recently found something that I'd written one of the times that someone was interrupting me quite a bit. And I wrote this whole piece about all of the things that you learn from experience and all of the things that you learn from having fresh eyes. And it was a great reminder to give brand new junior colleagues who may have said a few things that were clearly inexperienced to still give them the floor every time, because for everything that they're going to say that reveals their inexperience, they're also going to say something that's incredibly insightful because they are coming at the entire field with new eyes.
Mm.
As someone who manages to take on quite a lot and is often working at probably closer to breakneck speeds than I should be, I have to remind myself to slow down and to take a breath and give other people the benefit of the doubt more than I would like. And so I like having those reminders that I don't want to be that person who somebody else is looking at and saying, gee, I wish they would give me the same respect that they give someone who's worked here for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had wondered, and you were touching upon this, Marley, that you do operate at a velocity, a high velocity, and you also have a demanding career. I'm wondering, one thing that's been coming up with, it's a constant theme I'm hearing from the women I talk with, is trying, even if it's impossible, to find some balance, to have a full, whole, authentic life. And I know that you have a demanding career. Is this something now at this stage in your career that you are thinking about with intention? How do I find that balance? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah. I think because I didn't come into this, I didn't have a sort of 9 to 5 position until a solid 5, 6 years after college. It's helped me to evaluate what balance means to me. I've learned a lot from the people that I manage as well, that for one person who struggles with insomnia, balanced actually means allowing themselves to work at 2, 3, 4 in the morning if they happen to be awake then. And then remembering that and giving themselves grace when they want to go outside for a walk because it's gorgeous out at 2 p.m.
Yep.
Balance for some people means work hard, play hard, negotiate for those 3 weeks of vacation in a row and make that work because you work best when you can be heads down. For some people, balance means taking the position that's not going to have as many promotions because we live in a very unfair society, but being able to leave at 2:30 every day to go pick up the kids, spend time with the kids. I don't have children. And again, that's something that I'm aware makes some decisions easier for me. I love running. I love being outside. The best time to do that is during daylight hours. It is not uncommon for me to block off a chunk of my calendar that says, hey, out for a run, like, and then to wrap things up later in the day. But I remember when I was freelancing, a friend telling me to never allow the trade off to become this is how much money I could make if I worked instead of going to the movies with my friend. And I think that exists when we're not freelancing as well, when we're working for a corporation or what have you. Some places are really great about saying just get your work done. Some places are not. I feel it's very important that even in the places where they're treating you as though you must be here these hours, still just get your work done. I mean,
Yep.
that's my
Yep.
perspective is if I can get done, if I can set my expectations with my manager, with my company, if I can get done what needs to be done for me to feel good about what I'm doing, and if I can separate out the work life that I want to live from the should in the back of my head that I should do more, I should like don't should yourself.
Yep.
That is so much of what we do is, oh, well, I might let someone down. Okay, we
Hmm.
have to work as one part of life. And there have been times when it feels so exciting that when I wake up on Saturday morning, all I want to do is dive back into that thing I was doing
Yeah.
Friday. And that's okay. I also, at this point, have done that enough times that I've learned that when I do that Monday, I'm useless. I actually need a little bit more
Absolutely.
space for myself.
Yep.
Sometimes I come back from a week of vacation and I can't wait to dive back in. Sometimes I come back and I'm like, all right, yes, we're back to the grind. And you know, life, we're lucky, is long and it's important to enjoy work if you can. It's important to enjoy other things
Mhm.
as well. Yeah, you just got to find out what balance means to you and then don't judge yourself for taking it.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I was hearing your story about pivoting from theater
Hmm.
into UX and project management, I'd love to get your expertise. So, as part of Lift Up, I'm working with a lot of mid-career women. A lot of those women also are midlife women,
Hmm.
whatever we mean by midlife. But at a point in their career trajectory, the messy middle, that they've had successful careers, but they're trying to figure out what's next, and they don't want to continue along just the same traditional path. And you've had career inflection points, some major, probably some a little bit less drastic.
Yeah.
For these women who are mid-career and thinking about a pivot during this inflection point, do you have any recommendations? What would you say to them?
When I took the job at MadPow, I had sworn I was going to freelance for the rest of my life and I was never going to go back to an office. And so I remember creating a spreadsheet that there was basically a list of things that were requirements for me. What would the perfect office job look like? What would make an office job not feel like the image in my head of yet another office job? And for me, it had to be less than 45 minutes door to door on the subway system. I had to be able to bike there. So it also had to be accessible via the bike lanes. There had to be showers and bike parking. I had to have flexible hours. Flexible meaning I was not going to be in the office at 9 a.m. I am not a morning person. At the time, I was even less of one. And sometimes that would mean I would work later. Sometimes that just meant shorter days or longer days, but I need that flexibility. So, what would have to be so amazing that it would change this for me? And I made the list and I went to the interview and I came home and I said to my partner at the time, they're going to offer me the job and I'm going to take it. And he
Mhm.
said, did they meet everything on your list? And I was like, I don't even know. So from that, I take that both it's important to know what you're measuring against. And also sometimes you get lucky and the spark just happens. As
Mhm.
it turns out, when I go back to that, they did have bike parking. I believe that was my only question in the interview. It was gone so
Like,
well
what
in the three, and I
question do
was
you
like,
have about us, Marli? What's the
yeah,
bike
yeah. And I
parking
was like, is there
situation?
bike parking?
I love it.
But I knew, and also we live in a capitalist society. I had to be making a certain amount of money to be able to afford my rent or my mortgage payment or whatever it was, and the life that my cats have become accustomed to.
Mhm.
So I think if I were looking to make another change now, the first thing I would do would be go back to a list like that and say, what makes my life good that I'm not willing to change about it? And what are the things I don't have that I would like to have that would make something
Yep, that's really
change?
helpful advice. Thank you, Marli. Thank you for all of your lessons learned. I'm curious with your career now. What's coming next for you? Is that something you're thinking about?
Yes and no. Verily is at a pretty exciting spot where we have a number of really interesting projects. We're hiring a little bit more. We've been growing and expanding the UX team. The UX team and the product team work really nicely together. I've started getting closer to some of the data scientists. We're exploring a
Mhm.
lot of AI, but in a very ethical, responsible way. It feels like where some organizations have not yet, we've kind of gotten over the hump of I no longer have people asking me if I want to replace my team with AI. It seems like there's an
That's
actual
huge. Yeah.
understanding of where the technology is, but we're still exploring new technologies. So from that perspective, I see a lot of room for growth for myself and my team. I'm within a UX space that really values content, which is
Mhm.
incredibly important, and a product space that values content. I am starting to, now that we're finally in a space where COVID controls fewer of my life decisions, I'm starting to think about revisiting some side projects, whether that means doing more partnerships with fantastic groups like Lift Up, whether that means revisiting. I used to go to a lot of conferences.
Yep.
That space has changed a lot since COVID. I've been much less active. There's a lot to think about.
Mhm.
So I don't have, like, there's nothing to plug that's like coming
Yeah.
next. Look out for me. I'm coming.
But
But if
something's
anyone has,
coming, and you can't
I
always
know.
predict what it will be, right?
Yes,
Something
that's
will
true.
come.
That's
Yeah.
true. But if anyone has ideas, I am actively looking for my next side project
Mhm.
and where I want my brain space
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
obsess.
Well, Marli, thank you so much. It's always delightful to speak with you. And again, I'm so happy we reconnected. It had been years and years and
Mhm.
years. So I'm just delighted we had a chance to reconnect. Thank you.
Same. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Lift Up Connections. I hope this conversation with Marli left you feeling inspired to embrace a winding career path or life path and speaking up when it matters most to you. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with a friend or colleague. And if you're not already following Lift Up Connections, be sure to subscribe today so you don't miss some of the upcoming powerful conversations I'm having with women in tech. Until next time.